Okay, Danny Doyle here, and time for the end of playthrough tier list for my TTYD level 1 playthrough. So Tippy is here representing Mario, but otherwise, you know the partners, you know who they are, you know what they be. You watched the playthrough. Let's get into this. I think Mario is probably the strongest character in the game. By a fairly significant margin, in a vanilla context. However, in level 1, I do think that one character, ousted him of this title. And that should be fairly obvious who that is, if you watch the playthrough. I feel like the rankings of the partners won't be a huge surprise. But Mario, the special moves are very powerful, and in particular, being able to use freeze on a couple of early bosses, being able to just screen wipe with quakes and supernovas and whatnot, was very important, very impactful. Mario was the only person able to get double dip, because I wasn't venturing far enough into the pit to get double dip P. That would have been floor 70, which is a tall ask. I think Mario is definitely an S-tier character in the roster. I think that in a vanilla playthrough, he's easily the strongest, but I think in the context of a level 1 playthrough, he gets a lot more fragile because his HP never goes up. It just becomes, you can't equip as many badges, so he doesn't have as many abilities. Actually, I'm talking myself down to A tier, actually, because a lot of the, and granted, it's partially because I did equip badges that, boosted up partners instead of Mario. But the big thing is, when you're limited to only 3 BP, or, eventually 6 BP, but when you're initially, for the majority of the game, at 3 BP, for the first 5 chapters of this 8-chapter-long game, you're at 3 BP. He's stuck in this situation where if you want to run danger or peril strats, you can't also equip some of his more powerful tools, like multi-bounce. So yeah, I think A tier is kind of where I want him at. Even once we got 6 BP, it just became more efficient to stack someone who already had access to the moves they wanted, whether that be Koops or Yoshi. Next up is Goombella. And as Mario falls in quality, Goombella falls in quality, because Goombella's biggest, most influential trait is Rally Wink, allowing her to dance. I didn't make use of this a single time in the playthrough, and I never ran into a strategy where I felt like it was the best thing I could be doing. That said, she does sort of fill that Jagan role. She does sort of fill that role of, in the early game, it's Mega Rush P City, you got Goombella, you got Koops, those are options for it. And she does the multi-hit, he does the AoE hit. Granted, somebody ousts that title from her, fairly early on, but I think she's still solidly probably B tier, because there was a point in the game where she was the strongest option that I had. And that's more than I can say for some other people. Koops, I think, is the unit who gets the partner who gets the biggest glow up by level 1. Koops is an easy S tier. He was just the freest way to clear screens. Granted, his AoE was ground only. So if there were flying enemies, then he couldn't really do it. But it is hammer, he can hit. It's not hammer; it's hammer targeting. His standard attack's hammer targeting. But the fact that his attacks aren't jumps was pretty unique amongst the partners I actually want to be using. And so as a result, he ends up being my primary way of dealing with spiky enemies. My primary way of dealing with AoE, because there's not actually that many flying enemies that are also AoE. When there's flying enemies that I need to take care of in mandatory fights, usually there's only one of them. So, yeah, Koops just ended up being a fucking all-star. Really huge glow up, probably the biggest glow up of any of the partners. Just because, like, the only person who's better than him, I guess I'll spoil this part, the only person who's better than him is already better than him. And it just didn't really, it wasn't so much that they got a glow up, but just they didn't get a glow down. Flurry, unfortunately suffers. Probably not as much as Goombella. She's probably gonna end up lower than Goombella, but she doesn't suffer as much as Goombella. It's just that she doesn't have as far to fall as Goombella. Because of the limitations of my FP, I couldn't do Nos Tank Gale Force stuff. And, like, her best traits are very FP intensive. The ability to just infinitely tank by using the big smooch to steal HP. Very FP intensive. The ability to just clear entire screens of generic enemies doesn't apply to any of the bosses, and is, again, quite FP intensive. I think she ends up in C tier because there was really very, very few instances of her being the right person for the job. So we're filling out these tiers pretty quickly, but Yoshi is going to enter a tier that there's someone already in, and, like, if you watch the playthrough, you fucking know. Yoshi is S tier. Yoshi is an S tier unit. Yoshi was far and away the best and most crucial member of the team. Oswin just sweeps through the entire game. Like, it's kind of crazy just how fucking trivial he makes the endgame bosses with Mega Rush P, with, the stacked power rushes eventually, but, like, even before that, even before we get the stacked power rushes, because you don't get access to the gold card until chapter 7. So for chapters 3, 4, 5, he was just going off of Mega Rush P without stacking any extra effects, and even then, he deals so much damage. You know, you give him the power lift, which I guess is something that Mario's doing as well. Maybe it's an argument to move Mario up to S, but I don't think so. I think Yoshi's an S. I think Mario's A. I think Yoshi's S. Yoshi just was the most important person on the team, by a significant margin. Okay, Vivian is C tier specifically because she's required for one fight. For one fight, the Dupless fight. Actually, she wasn't even really that good in that fight. I think C ends up at the top of F tier because of that one fight. But, like, Mario was doing most of the heavy lifting there. Yeah, I think she ends up in F tier because of that. That's really tragic for her. That's really tragic for her, actually. That, like, she has that free availability moment, and she just didn't do anything with it. That's really tragic for her. Bobbery's niche is useful in strategy that I didn't employ. But it's enough to make him above Mouse. Like, Mouse was just a damage sponge in the pit. But, like, literally anyone could have been that. Yeah, these three are... It's very sad how, like, the best partners get front-loaded, which means that, like, the worst partners don't even get to, like, claim availability. Like, if Mao's joined you when Goombella joined you, right? At least she'd be able to be like, oh, well, you know, you have her for chapter 1 or something, right? But no, it's really tragic. It's really sad and tragic. How just, like, the best people are so front-loaded. Yeah, that's really sad. Anyway, that's the list. There's fewer people in TTYD than there are in 64, so it took less time. And also there was, like, less to talk about, right? A lot of the things that made these people good was very straightforward.